right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, East Coast on the East Coast. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today for the third session in celebration of the 2025 NEA Translation Fellows Reading Series, graciously hosted by Kat. Thank you. Kat is Center for the Art of Translation. Just give a couple minutes for people to roll in. But so if you missed the first two sessions, as a reminder, today is the third of 5 hour-long sessions. We, first of all, would like to thank the Center for the Art of Translation for supporting our Zoom series and putting the word out. The Instagram graphics are beautiful, on point. Thank you. Thank you to Jeffrey Zuckerman for coming up with the idea of having this cohort read and organizing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, Leslie, and Chad, Casey, Ellison, and all the wonderful staff at CAT for helping us do this in celebration of translation, of understanding, of communication, efforts to understand, efforts to communicate. So since 1981, the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, has awarded more than 600 fellowships to 538 literary translators across 82 languages and 93 countries. And this 2025 cohort was awarded grants to support translations into English of works written in 17 different languages from 21 countries. Once again, we want to thank Amy Stolz, Katie Day, and other former NEA staffers who worked tirelessly to support artists and translators in every way they could. We're very grateful for all the work you've done. And before I turn over to today's moderator, Kala Almani, whom I hope you read last week, it was wonderful. I want to mention that we'll be back for the next 2 weeks, 2 more times, same time, with more incredible presentations from 2025 NEA Translation Fellows. And the last session on October 17th will culminate with members of the judging panel sharing insights from their selection process, like how they chose this cohort, which I, for one, am very interested to hear. All right, over to you, Kalau.
All right, thank you very much, YZ. So hello, everyone, and please welcome our 4 fellows presenting today. So today up is Jenny Bhatt, Alex Zucker, Faye Lethem, and Alta L. Price. They'll each share their project awarded a 2025 NEA grant, and at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Okay, so first up today is Jenny Bhatt, who translates from Gujarati and is currently pursuing a PhD in literature at the University of Texas at Dallas, where she also teaches undergraduate creative writing.
Thank you, Kalau, and thank you, YZ and Jeffrey. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, okay. And thank you, YZ and Jeffrey, for arranging all of this. It's great. Thank you to Kat for hosting us. I mean, I know I've said it before, but I'm just very grateful to be part of this cohort and this community, and it's always nice to see all these familiar faces and fellow translators. All right, I'll go ahead and get started, and I'm going to put my timer on, even though I'm going to get a 2-minute warning, but I'll still do that. So I'm going to read today from an excerpt from a 600-page novel, which I picked for my sins, I guess. But it's a beautiful novel. It's by a Gujarati writer called Varsha Adalja, who has, she's in her 80s. She's written lots of novels and TV scripts and plays and all kinds of things, but she's not known, even in India, outside of the Gujarati literary community. And what I like about this particular novel, it is a landmark achievement in Gujarati literature, not just because it's the 600 pages of tiny Gujarati font. It reclaims the history of India's independence by shifting, the focus from the usual male heroics to the struggles of Gujarati women for personal freedom from a deeply patriarchal society. And so the saga centers on the coming of age of this main character, this woman, Kumud, from when she's about, when she's a child to when she's in her 70s, and the family of women. And they're navigating all these national changes while they're confronting very critical social issues, intersectional issues like child marriage and female infanticide, caste discrimination, sexual violence, and fight for education and voting rights. And so it's just showing us this amazing amount of social reform that was also happening for women about that time. And Adalja writes in a very vivid cinematic prose. It's also very well researched. And the dramatic scene that I'm about to read, Kumud has finally escaped from her terrible life of a child widow. She was married as a child, and then the husband died, and so she was a child widow. And in those days, they were very much segregated and ostracized and not allowed to leave the house, and they had to shave their heads and wear just white clothes and eat very bland food, and there was all kinds of restrictions. But anyway, she has managed to get past that, and she's remarried, and her new husband runs a revolutionary publication that prints stories about the British government, and she's returned to her village with him to see her family get their blessings. So a crowd has gathered, as you would imagine, a crowd has gathered at the temple because they know there's going to be a big showdown, between the first husband's family, father, who are very rich people, and the new husband, who is this revolutionary liberal kind of fellow. And I love how in this scene, the crowd is also a character. It's almost like they have a Greek chorus kind of role. The women in this scene particularly don't have a lot of speaking. They don't do much speaking, but the scene is a setup for when they end up, standing up in front of the whole village and speaking out. So it's kind of a setup as well. So anyway, let me get to it. All right. On one side were the newlyweds, and on the other, Sheikh Bhavani Shankar. They stood face to face. The sheikh was dressed in a fine, elegant outfit. A long white daglo covered his torso, a bright red pagri perched on his head, and a gold-embroidered silk case hung from his shoulders. People were surprised. Was the father-in-law here to welcome his son's wife and her new husband, as if he were a member of the wedding party? Everyone had come hoping to see a fight. But Bhavani Shankar was simply smiling. Pratap Singh Bapu was getting antsy, thinking, Alia Bhavani, grab that daft woman's braid and just start dragging her. Ranchod's eyes were fixed on his estranged wife, Vasanthi. He couldn't tell just by looking at her belly how many months pregnant the bitch was. She must have gotten rid of the child in her womb by now. He was keenly waiting to see this family of wretched women dragged through the mud together. Fearful, Kumud reached out to pull her sari pala over her head. Parasha stopped her hand. Parasha is the husband. Then he leaned forward and touched Bhavani Shankar's feet. Bhavani Sheth, give us your blessings. The crowd watched in stunned silence. A gleam appeared on Bhavani Shankar's face and in his eyes. He raised his hand. The crowd held its breath. Hi, will Sheth bless this runaway bride? Instead, with a sudden motion, the Sheikh folded his hands together. His gaze swept over the eager faces of the crowd. Brothers and sisters, I have some good news. My son, Kumud's husband, is still alive. It was as if thunder had roared and lightning had cracked across the cloudy sky. Bhavani Shankar's Govind is alive? Kumud has married this newspaper while her husband is still alive. Well then, you all decide her punishment. The stains on my family's honor have also tainted the village's honor, have they not? Dazed, Kumud swayed and lost her balance. Usha and Vasanthi grabbed hold of her. Jayaba and Samukaki began to chant to the mother goddess, Jayambe Ma. Staring at each other, the crowd began to buzz. Alia, do corpses come back from the crematorium? His son drowned at sea. The entire community had scoffed ladus at the feast after his funeral, sung songs of mourning. And now he was alive? Surely Bhavani Shankar had lost his mind from the shock of Kumud's second marriage. But why is that newspaper wallah standing there so calmly? As if victory were a strong mouthful of opium, Bhavani Shankar became intoxicated. Today, he wasn't the pitiful, helpless man he had been in front of the village the last time. He swiveled around to the group he had brought with him. They'd been standing in a huddle like a tightly knotted bundle. At Bhavani's silent glance, they moved apart. Among them, a man stood, looking like a living skeleton, all hunched and twisted. His eyes were wide with terror as he took in the crowd. His body was shaking violently as if he had a fever. This is my son, Govind himself. Look for yourselves. The crowd buzzed again. Hi, this is Govind. His complexion was grey, as if the ashes from the hearth had been rubbed all over him. His eyes were dull and dim, like two dying lamps in deep recesses. He had a few wisps of hair fluttering on his head, and his hands hung limply by his sides. Bhavani Shankar extended an arm and pointed. Look to your heart's content, Bab. My son Govind has returned from the depths of hell. Alya Bhai Parashar, as my son is alive, your marriage to his wife is completely invalid. And even though she went to live in another man's house, it is only because of my noble breeding and position that we will take her back. Ali, come. Now, will you come forward, or should I drag you? For this one moment, Bhavani Shankar had been willing to sacrifice his entire life. The poison of years of humiliation and pain was turning into nectar, cooling every pore of his body. The village folk were not just getting a taste of the drama, they were getting a whole well full of it. Dalpat Mama and Mahesh were dumbfounded. Parashar stood there, still carefree and smiling. Bhavani Shankar took a long stride, reaching out to grab Kumud's wrist. She screamed and hid behind Parashar. And Bhavani Shankar gritted his teeth and moved forward. But Parashar held up a warning hand. Bhavani Shankar, don't you dare lay a finger on my wife. Like a cannonball, Bhavani Shankar exploded. Array, off with you, you two-bit newspaper wallah, you beggar. Who are you to stop me? This wicked girl married my son with great fanfare in front of the entire village. I didn't hire her for temporary help, did I? She belongs to us outright. Hey, constable, be a man. Arrest this criminal bastard. Why are the rest of you standing there like fools? Take Kumud away. Trembling like a dry leaf, Govind stood leaning against someone's shoulder and stared blankly. The constable started to move forward with a pompous air. Parashar said coolly, Constable, if you lay a finger on me or Kumud, you'll definitely get caught in the clutches of the law. You might even lose your khaki uniform. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenny. That was wonderful. So next up is Alex Zucker, who translates from Czech and has just published his latest translation this week, Playing Wolf, a deliciously creepy Little Red Riding Hood inspired novel by Zuzana Rihova. And you know what? We even have a link here in our script for today. So let me go and put that in the chat before we move on to anything else. So
I
curious
just
people.
posted it actually. Oh,
Oh,
now
I'm
we have it
sorry.
twice.
Well, yeah, it's there twice, so you cannot miss it. Okay. So with that, I'll hand things over to Alex.
Thank you so much, Kala. Thank you, Jeffrey and YZ for organizing this. I'm not going to go through all the other thanks because we've got limited time, but I am hugely grateful, especially to the National Endowment for the Arts and the folks who work there who awarded this money under I guess kind of extreme duress, and sending my warmth to all of you if you are watching or see this at any point. In 2016, the Margelos World Republic of Letters at Yale University Press published my translation of Tomasz Zmeszkal's first novel, Milosny dopis klinowym pismem, in English love letter in cuneiform, about the impact of totalitarianism on a family in Czechoslovakia from the 1940s up to the 1990s. The project, for which I received an NEA Literature and Translation Fellowship, Biography of a Black and White Lamb, published in Czech as Životopis Černobílého jehněte in 2009, is the second novel by Zmeškal, a writer who identifies as Afro-Czech. His mother was a white woman from Czechoslovakia, and his father was a black man from the country now known as Democratic Republic of the Congo. Biography of a Black and White Lamb tells the story of biracial twins, Lucia and Václav, coming of age in communist Czechoslovakia in the 1970s and 80s. Raised in Prague by their white grandmother after their parents die in a car crash, or so they are told, initially the two siblings are unaware of how their skin color sets them apart from their peers. As they mature, they increasingly run up against the barriers and frustrations of being Black in a nearly all-white society. One of the things that I pointed out in my application for the grant was that this is actually the only novel by a Black writer who was born and grew up in any country of the former East Bloc. There are other Black authors in formerly communist Eastern Europe, in Poland in particular, but they're young people who didn't grow up under communism. So to describe this novel as filling a gap would be an understatement. So this excerpt, which I'm going to read, however, has nothing to do with race and was chosen purely for its entertainment value. It comes from the end of chapter 1. When they entered the cafe, they saw Aunt Schwarzova already seated at one of the round tables by the window with Aunt Munkova. The twins called them aunts, but of course they weren't really their aunts. They were their grandmother's old friends from the ancient times before the twins had come into the world. Aunt Schwarzova had a Vienna coffee, a half-eaten soccer dort, and a glass of mineral water on the table in front of her. Long ago, there had also been a similar cafe on the round square in their grandmother's neighborhood, but it had been turned into a savings bank and the cafe closed down. Here at Manas, newspapers hung in wicker holders from pegs on the wall, but the aunts and their grandma rarely had time for them. Once, Lucia had asked Aunt Munkova why they never read them, and this was her reply. The only thing worth reading in those papers is the weather report, the classifieds, and an article about nature every now and then. Otherwise, dearie, it's nothing but nonstop lies. After exchanging greetings, and once the twins had decided whether to sit with the old ladies or at a table all to themselves, Lucia and Václav each ordered a soda pop. They were also entitled to 2 pastries each, which they could order either both at once or one at a time. There were many subtle factors involved in how they chose to distribute their allotment, but Lucia almost always ordered her pastries both at once, while Václav tended to order his individually. Nobody ever discouraged them from sitting at the ladies' table. In fact, just the opposite. But the Tuesday cafe sessions lasted from 5:30 to 7:30 or so, sometimes even until 8 o'clock. They dragged on endlessly from the children's point of view, so they needed a way to take the boredom in smaller doses. For Václav, that meant not eating both pastries at once, and for Lucia, not visiting with all the aunts in the first 20 minutes, since she then ended up even more bored. The aunts, like the pastries, had to be made to last, so it was best to sample them one by one. Another reason why Václav ordered his pastries half an hour apart was so he could engage in his favorite Tuesday activity, which was observing the waiter. Although in front of them, the children, he was always referred to simply as the waiter, the aunts addressed him by name. Every week they came and smiled at him, and he would bow gallantly and say, "Good afternoon, ladies." And one of the aunts would reply, "Good afternoon, Mr. Tregel," the same way every time, and then they would exchange 2 or 3 sentences about the weather or some general comment about politics, always with an aggrieved look. Aunt Schwarzova, for instance, after remarking on the afternoon showers and morning mist, said, "They're the rulers, Mr. Tregel. They're the rulers, we're the ruled." To which Mr. Tregel replied with the slight bow he used to indicate a certain sort of private conversation, "Yes, madam, quite. They're the rulers, we're the ruled." Whoops, I read the same line again. The slight bow he used to indicate a sort of private conversation, he replied, "Yes, madam, quite. I often wonder what we've done to deserve God's punishment." Mr. Tregel never ceased to fascinate Václav. He must have been the oldest person in the world. The oldest elephant at the zoo in Prague, Troja, was almost as fascinating, but Mr. Tregel topped the elephant for several simple reasons. Number one, he wasn't in a cage, so it was easier to get near him. Number two, he could be given instructions, say, for instance, to bring a soda pop or a certain type of pastry. Although it was true, each instruction had to be followed by the collocation, "Mr. Waiter, sir, please." And number three, he was absolutely without a doubt much older and remembered more than even the oldest elephant in the zoo. Mr. Tregel, the waiter, the oldest person in the world, was also totally bald. Not only was he old, but so was the skin on his head and neck. At the point where his head joined his neck, it was folded into little creases. Even when Václav stood in front of the mirror at home in their bathroom and tried to wrinkle the skin on his neck like Mr. Tregel's, it just wouldn't stay, which of course only heightened the feeling of awe that Václav felt in his presence. Mr. Tregel's skin was like a cross between an elephant's and a lizard's, and he covered it over with a snow-white, flawlessly fitting, twin-breasted jacket, which looked more like another layer of skin than an ordinary garment. He wore a black bow tie around his neck and black pants sharply creased on his legs. His fingers were long and carried the coffees, glasses of wine, and desserts calmly and deliberately. However, what fascinated Václav even more than how Mr. Tregel looked was the way he moved. He never made a quick move. Without the twins even knowing, he would suddenly appear by their side, slowly look them up and down, then bring their soda pops or take away their empty plates. His gait was on the border between noiselessly skating across the carpet and levitating a few inches above the ground. One time Václav couldn't resist and laid an ambush for Mr. Tregel, waiting until he was near their table, then intentionally bumping his elbow into an empty soda glass. Mr. Tregel slowly and unhurriedly bent over and caught the glass less than an inch above the carpet. He didn't give so much as a glance to Václav, continuing his regular rounds of the other tables and guests, while in his left hand, lightly and seemingly without a thought, clenching the glass that should have broken to smithereens. Václav tried to comprehend this balancing act, but just couldn't do it. The whole catching of the suddenly falling glass by the slow-moving oldest person the twins had ever seen was a mystery to him. Václav attempted a similar feat at home, and the glass fell on the rug twice before. On the third try, it smashed to smithereens. Now he was practically certain that somehow Mr. Tregel must have known in advance what he had in mind. Though he didn't confide his belief to anyone, he became convinced that Mr. Tregel must be able to read people's minds, at least the ones sitting in the cafe. There was no other explanation. At first, the thought of it actually frightened him, so he tried to think only of good things until everything fell back into the old routines. Occasionally, when one of the twins succeeded in dropping something in their lap, their grandmother would notice, raise her eyes to Mr. Tregel, and he would know exactly what had happened each and every time, as if the world had long since ceased to hold any mysteries for him. With one simple gesture, he would point the way, and the pastry-stained Václav or Lucia would follow him to the cloakroom or the anteroom by the kitchen, where the catastrophes of quick-drying chocolate and sugar-loaded soda pop were ruthlessly eliminated. Mr. Tregel, the waiter, never smiled. He never even raised the corners of his mouth. Václav had hopes of one day catching him in the act of something so daring as a smile, although, to be honest, even a mere grin would have sufficed. Without any reason to smile about the world, however, Mr. Tregel was and remained serious. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. Okay, so our next speaker will be Faye Lethem, who translates from Catalan and Spanish, and was just named a finalist for the 2025 Cirque d'Or Prize for her translation of Irene Sola's I Gave You Eyes and You Looked Towards Darkness, which is an amazing title. All right.
Hello. I think I'm the only one in this cohort who is working on a book of short stories. And I want to take advantage to read two stories. They're both quite short. I'm going to assume all the thanking and um, these stories are by Pere Caldés, who's a Catalan modern classic, born in 1912 and died in 1994. So lived through a very tumultuous century in Catalonia and otherwise, and spent 23 years in Mexico City in exile. And so I'm very pleased to be able to read these out loud and kind of hear them myself. So I'm just gonna go right into it. This first story is called Hedera Helix. Haven't you ever experienced the tenderness that simple kindnesses can provoke? I have, and I've regretted it ever since. Just to pick a random example, something that happened with a friend springs to mind. Once, hoping to surprise me, she cooked one of my favorite dishes, and at the end of the meal, she handed me a package that contained an arrogant necktie. Yes, I know that adjective is sort of bewildering, but I spent weeks searching for a different one, and in the end, found that to be the most suitable. The thing is, it wasn't my saint's day or my birthday. I had nothing to celebrate, and as much as it pains me to confess it, her delicate attentions softened my heart. And that was despite the color of the tie and my years of training to achieve an ideal solidness of character. The next day, as I had already resolved, I went to the flower market. The night before, I had devoted hours of my sleeping time to choosing a gift that would work well, and hard as this is to believe, my final verdict was in favor of buying a climbing plant, because my friend kept an indoor garden, with one of its four directions bounded by a wall I found horrid. Surreptitiously, the idea was to show both my thoughtfulness and at the same time conspire against the wall, which would die choked by the plant. Those who know me are already aware that I am patient in the things that merit patience, but that I tend to rush the others. In the case of the plant, it seemed from the very start that I shouldn't waste time, and I said that directly to the vendor, who showed me his wares. Here's one that grows in a matter of several days. That won't do at all. I'm looking for one that grows faster. That one on the end takes half the time. Still too long. The florist looked at me for a while, and then concluded that my request was a special one. Strange, he asked me to permit him to say. He advised me to go to a nearby stand with difficult plants, and following his recommendation, a moment later I found myself trying to explain what I was looking for to another vendor. I have what you want, said the merchant, but the law prohibits me from selling these sort of plants without the customer first accepting full responsibility for the purchase. If you're willing to sign a few papers. I was willing, obviously, and I filled out a few official forms. Then the merchant scattered some seeds into a pot and asked me to keep my eye on the surface of the soil, which began to swell in 2 or 3 spots, and with an appreciable buzzing, burst open with a few tiny green sprouts. Now that's what I'm talking about. What's it called? Oh, it's a little-known variant of Hedera helix. We established a price, and before I left, the man warned me that if I lived at some distance, it wouldn't behoove me to dilly-dally on the way. I grabbed the pot with both hands and pressed it against my chest, using the walk home to imagine how happy my friend would be. Outside the covered market, there was a man who was dancing on broken glass, and that's a sight I can never pass up. As I watched him, I felt the ivy reaching my face, and it grew with a buzz like the flight of bees, which I found alarming. The leaves scratched at my face and were a real nuisance, even going so far as to climb over my outer ear, depriving me of my full hearing. Then I wanted to catch a cab, but the taxi drivers, with that sinister instinct so typical of them, realized what was happening to me and raised their fares. Irritated, I changed my mind, opting instead to start racing as fast as I could. I remember that as I passed a cathedral, the plant trapped my arms. I was no longer carrying the pot in my hands, but it was held up by the leaves that were clinging to my body. In any case, it didn't matter because the pot was less resistant than I. The bottom cracked and roots emerged, traveling eagerly down my legs in search of soil. Shortly before arriving home, I could already see it. The shoots impeded my movements so much that I had to advance by hopping, with my feet together. I desperately shifted the muscles in my face, trying to alter the course of its growing and keep it from obstructing my vision. When I was almost at my door, the roots reached the ground and penetrated it, turning me into a tuft of grass. A cluster of stems divided beneath my chin, each half sprouting up one of my cheeks, and when they reached the top of my head, they reunited into a braid in such a way that I grit my teeth and couldn't emit a single sound. Through the clearings left by the leaves, I widened my eyes, which was all I could do at that point. You can imagine how I felt when I saw that my friend was returning home after her regular shopping hour. Noting the unusual layer of green, she identified me by the necktie, which was sticking out of the plant. She came over, threatened me lovingly with one hand, and using that sweet voice I found so beguiling, said, "Get out of that tree and stop acting like a child. Can't you see you're too old for such things?" This is the second one. It's also involving foliage, coincidentally. The indoor tree. I've had many secrets in this life, but one of the biggest, perhaps the one most out of step with the official truth, is the one I've decided the time has now come to tell. One morning, when I woke up, I found a tree growing in the dining room of my home. No, really, it was an honest-to-God tree with roots going through the tiles and branches that pressed against the ceiling. I could immediately tell it wasn't any sort of prank, and seeing as I had no trusted loved one with whom to confide such things, I went in search of the police. I was received by a captain with a customary long mustache and wearing a suit whose elegance I am at a loss to describe, since it was covered in epaulets. I said, "I've come to inform you that in the dining room of my home a real tree has sprouted up, entirely without my consent." The man, as you can imagine, was surprised. He looked at me for a good long while and then said, "That can't be." Yes, of course, one never knows with these things, but the tree is there, blocking the light and getting in my way. My words irritated the captain. He smacked the table with an open hand, stood up, and grabbed me in that way that's so maddening, by the lapel. "That can't be," I said, he repeated. "If that were possible, anything would be possible. Do you understand? We'd have to review everything our wise men have ever said, and we'd waste much more time than it seems at first glance. We would be in a fine fix if such extraordinary things happened in the dining rooms of common citizens. The revolutionaries would be emboldened. They would start arguing with us about the divinity of the king. And who knows, some world power, their curiosity piqued, might even declare war. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Yes, but despite everything, I touched the tree with my very own hands. All right, all right. Just forget about it. If you keep this secret between you and me, the state will reward you for your silence. He was about to write out a check when my conscience rallied. "Is this of national interest?" I asked. "Most certainly." "Then I won't take a penny. I'd do anything for the fatherland, you know. I'll do whatever you say." A few days later, I received a letter from the king thanking me, and with that, who among us wouldn't feel they'd been handsomely paid? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was wonderful. Okay, so last up tonight is Alta L. Price, who translates from Italian and German, and is often possessed by both of those languages, much like the main character we're about to meet. All right, Alta, go ahead. Oh, before I hand it over to Alta, actually, a reminder for everyone in the audience that we do have a little bit of time for Q&A after this. So if you would like to ask a question to any of these people, there's a little box at the bottom. Please feel free to type your questions or comments in there. Sorry for that. Now, Alta, please take it over.
No worries. Thank you so much, Kalau, for emceeing us this morning. And I too echo everyone else's thanks. It means an immense deal to me, both to me and to my author, to have received this distinction of the NEA support. And I'm really moved by all of the readings by my fellow translators. Mara, I wasn't aware. I'm sensing echoes actually between your text and mine. So I will dive right in with my reading. Tongue Mother, here's the original cover, Lingua Madre. Maddalena Fingerle's delightfully disorienting debut novel, uses linguistic thorniness to explore the complexities of identity amid the remnants of empire. It was released by the Incursioni imprint of the aptly named indie publisher Italo Svevo Edizioni in 2021 and garnered significant critical acclaim. Some of you, yeah, the publisher is named for another Italian author who has his own history with Italian notions of empire. This book is a delirium-tinged first-person narrative and tells the story of Paolo Prescher, a young man born and raised in the ostensibly bilingual, supposedly harmonious city of Bolzano or Bozen, South Tyrol. Incensed by dirty words, people's hypocritical, dishonest use of language, he flees to Berlin and meets Mira, who helps him clean up his experience of language with such success that he is ultimately able to return home. The main story unfolds in 3 parts, starting in Bolzano, moving to Berlin, and returning to Bolzano, and is a provocative exploration of language's power. Maddalena Fingele, born in 1993, has an incisive wit wrought in an autonomous region of Italy that was part of Austria until the end of World War I. Her creative writing gives voice to this contested cultural borderland and is linguistically situated between Italian and German. There's a lot of humor between the 2 languages throughout this novel. Her characters speak from these margins, offering new perspective on our present-day notions of homeland, identity, neurodivergence, and belonging, while also challenging these concepts' attendant beliefs. I've intentionally chosen to render the original Italian title Lingua Madre with the vexing, powerfully disorienting, and overly literal yet bizarrely backwards title Tongue Mother for multiple reasons. First, because Italian interchangeably uses both lingua madre and madrelingua to mean mother tongue or native language. But our traditional English renderings erase the overlapping notions of a tongue and a language. They often erase the role of the mother too, which is a key element of this particular narrative and the hierarchies within it. Furthermore, there are countless books already titled Mother Tongue. And finally, I feel the use of familiar everyday terms is essential here. And by reversing the word order, I aim to conjure up the alienation the main character experiences from his own language or languages throughout the story as he strives to reacquire his first language in a purer, more livable form. In both Italian and English, and it has already been translated into German. The resulting prose takes some getting used to. So here's an excerpt from the very first chapter of the book. Again, we are in Paolo's head, and he's an angsty teenager. My mother has been crying since I was born. She cries because my first word is word. She cries because I say word and not mother. My mother cries, cries, cries. She cries because I tell her that by now, word no longer means word because she has dirtied every word. She cries because I tell her I hate dirty words because they're as dirty as the word word. She cries because I tell her I have words in my head and they're as dirty as the word word. She's stupid, she doesn't get it, so she just cries. Dad, on the other hand, is a head case. Some say it's aphasia, others say it's muteness. Psychiatrists and psychologists argue with one another. One shouts aphasia, the other muteness, and nobody wins. It's one big, huge fight between my mother and my grandmother, between the neighborhood news vendor and the butcher, between our neighbor and the groundskeeper, and nobody wins. Dad's in the middle of it all, and even he can't win. My mother always says, "Your father suffers from aphasia." To me, the word aphasia is scary because it makes me suffocate and I get a bout of asthma, which I brought on myself because if he's aphasic, I must be asthmatic. Dad wasn't always totally mute. When I was little, he had selective muteness, words that make me choke a little less, so I was hoping to get away with selective asthma. But then he stopped talking completely, so now he has real aphasia and I have real asthma. A little Ventolin and a lot of nebulizer, and I'll feel better already. But for Dad, it's not so easy. I hand him some Ventolin under the table so my mother can't see. He winks at me and takes a hit from the inhaler, but he doesn't get any better because he keeps on not talking. So I try sharing my nebulizer with him. I get fed up with how I'm always supposed to be on it anyway. And I open it 1,000,000 times, and my mother says I have to use it until the liquid runs out, and I absolutely mustn't open it or the effect wears off. But she always says that about fresh squeezed orange juice too, that you have to drink it right away or else the effect wears off. And if you ask me, none of it's true. So I explain to her, I was just checking. And then when she's not looking, I let Dad try. He puts it on and breathes it, but still doesn't speak. So when my mother's distracted, I toss the liquid into a house plant and figure if it has asthma, it'll get better. But the plants in our house don't have asthma, they have aphasia because they don't speak either. My mother says, "You've got to talk to plants." And I try to, even though I don't know what to say. I just recite some random poem. But then I feel dumb, so no, I'll never try that again. They can keep their aphasia. So then I figure I'll try reciting some poetry to Dad. To me, this lonely horn was always dear, though thought the rhinoceros when no one was near. Dad? He smiles, but doesn't say a word. Our houseplants are useless because they can't even smile. I don't really remember Dad talking. I just know that once upon a time, he too had words in his head. I don't know how or why I know how, I just do. But then he must have lost them. Or maybe he just pretended to because he couldn't stand talking to my mother anymore. Yeah, I'll bet he's just pretending. So I wink at him as if to say, "Your secret's safe with me, Dad. I swear I won't tell anyone, Dad." Our house is full of objects with little tags stuck on them saying what they are. Grandma looks at Dad's labels and says he's plagued by language in his own peculiar way. Grandma asks me, "Does he still read a lot?" She can ask whatever she wants. I'm just happy she doesn't mess with his labels. No, I tell her. And I add that Dad does write a lot, but I only say that last part in my head. Yep, he sure writes a lot of words. And if he can write them, it must mean he's only pretended to lose them. Otherwise, he wouldn't know how to write them, right? I'd like to ask someone about that, but I can't ask my sister because she couldn't care less. And I can't ask my mother either because she's so self-absorbed that she never understands a thing. Dad has written typewriter on the typewriter. He's written bookcase on the bookcase. He's written pen on the pen. He's written window on the window. He's written door on the door. And he's written letter opener on the letter opener. Our house is different from other people's houses because things here are attached to their names. And when I say the word table in my head, I see the big black table in the living room that gets covered in fingerprints whenever you touch it. When people say table, I can smell it. Wood, dust, and glue. And when my mother cleans the table, it smells like denatured alcohol, the pink kind they sell at hardware stores. It's not a good smell though, because it gets the word table dirty by association. To me, all tables are black and they also smell like ink. Chimeras are black too. I'm not sure why, but they're pitch black. Maybe because of the ink or maybe because of calimero, that chimeric cartoon character who's the only black chicken in a clutch of yellow chickens. In our house, even the chair has a label. In our entryway, in plain sight, there's a label that says floor. So people who enter our house immediately think, what a nut house. I'll end it there.
All right, thank you so much, Alta, and thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Those were all really wonderful readings. So we still have a little bit of time for questions, and it seems like we've got two from Jeffrey, a first one for Jenny and Alex, and then a second one for Mara and Alta. So I guess we'll start with a question for Jenny and Alex. So Jeffrey's asking, these scenes were very visceral or these scenes were very things that we could easily see and imagine. And so how immediate was the translation experience for you guys? Was it just kind of something you could picture and put on the page, or was there a lot going on behind the scenes there?
Well, I'll answer that quickly, I guess. And then, this is chapter 43 of 70 chapters in the novel. And so there's already been a few set scenes like this, the crowd in the village gathering because there's some new scandal or drama. And what I found was, this is one of the challenges with Salvation writers in the regional languages, and that is, there's not a lot of editing that publishers provide because of, skinny budgets. And so I found that with every crowd scene I was doing, I wanted continuity because I wanted this crowd to emerge as a very consistent character. And so with every crowd scene I do, I actually have to take time to go back and then edit each scene, each crowd scene. And so even though the crowd scene I didn't maybe do as much editing, but then I have to go back and re-edit the others just for that consistency and flow. And the other thing is, a lot of times the author, she hasn't put like tags at all. And so because it's a crowd scene, you've got multiple people. Unless you really know the characters, you won't know who's talking necessarily. And so I sometimes even have to go back and double check. So I think the biggest challenge for me is just the lack of any editing that the publisher might do for these things that even I miss as a writer, but then I have a good editor who can help me and say, oh, you missed a speech tag there, or I'm not clear who's talking here, And so that kind of thing is tricky. So I do find myself having to refine, and then go back and refine each crowd scene whenever I'm doing these. She's totally fine when she's doing the smaller scenes, like one or two people talking, but when it's a large crowd, I think she tends to lose control a little bit of crowd, what do you call it? Crowd management, I guess. So I find that I'm doing a lot of that when I'm translating, I guess. So.
I totally sympathize with the dialogue thing because that's very common in Japanese too. It's just no dialogue tags for anything. So, anyway, Alex, what about you?
So as you can grasp from this excerpt, although, like I said, I chose it for its entertainment value, that Tomasz is a very close observer of human behavior and likes to dwell or focus in on, I should say, on details and how people interact with each other, the way they move, the kind of, micro movements of a scene. But this particular, I would say between those two, Jeffrey, between the words just flowing and a lot of hidden painstaking work, I mean, I can't say that the words just flowed. I mean, they always just flow at the first draft, but then there's always the painstaking work in the second draft and the third draft. And then if you do more drafts, and of course there's the copy editing and the proofreading, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this is not the most complex writing that I've ever translated, or even within this novel. There are definitely scenes that are trickier and that require more what's the word? Untangling. Czech has a very different word order from English, but it depends on the type of scene. And otherwise in Czech, the main issue often is, you know, their past or even present can be very simple. Did, you know, went, saw, whereas in English there are many times where we'd want to say doing, going, seeing, you know, and so there are a lot of choices I have to make about that, but that's not particular to this author or this text.
Thank you for that, Alex. Okay, and Jeffrey has another question for you, Mara and Alta, so you don't, so to get you guys involved too. And he said that there's a very strong immediacy in the works that you were reading, and asks, how did you find these books? And did that immediacy come to you right away? Like, did you immediately want to translate these when you found them?
I guess I can go first. I have come to think of myself as someone who is very bad at being able to read a text and know how difficult it's going to be to translate. um, I'll often underestimate things, and that is certainly the case with Caldes. I was partly drawn to translate him because I felt that he was missing in the canon of Catalan literature in English, unfairly. So I kind of felt sorry for him. But he has a kind of a, you know, for someone who had a day job, a very large body of work. So, and in this collection that the NEA is supporting, it's a collection that he actually made of his favorite stories. But they span 4 decades at least, and so they're very varied, even in terms of language. And but I've really enjoyed preparing for this reading because it's kind of helped me to feel like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. So, yeah.
Thank you for that.
And for mine, yeah, that's so interesting that your author is so prolific, Mara. And I think my author will be prolific. She's just at the start of a sort of a very ascendant career. She's moved from the tiny indie publisher she was with to start, and is now with one of the larger publishers in Italy. I honestly, I'm trying to remember, because I feel as though I've dreamt about this book so much. I think I discovered the Italian first through some reviews, also through a friend mentioning having read it. But I also remember when it came out in German, and hearing the reviews there and noticing that the author was able to give interviews and, you know, without need for translation or interpretation, with interviewers in both of those languages. So it just really, I think, because of there are very specific overlaps between my two otherwise not super related languages, that it really spoke to me. Much like Mara said, I also underestimate, and I think especially with this particular text where there are hints of synesthesia, the particular neuroses that the main character is dealing with lead to it being a very particular use of language that is deceptively simple and might look very straightforward, but really, really isn't. And this notion for Paolo, dirty words are when people use words to mean things other than what they should mean in his sense. And the relevance of this right now for the English language is deeply troubling to me. So in a sense, this novel has become more urgent for me the more I see my own the language I grew up speaking taking on different notions of what reality is, or how closely do words correspond with the meaning that I understand.
Thank you. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and we've got one more question from YZ. But before that, I just want to point out that in our chat we have, I guess we're going to start another thread where we can talk about when all of our works come out too, and hopefully we'll find a way to keep that information out there too. Yeah, so to wrap up with YZ's question for all of you, is that each of these works tonight really do have very distinctive voices. And YZ is asking, do you usually just focus on one work at a time to preserve that voice? And I would like to just add, if there's anything else that you do that helps you find or keep that voice, I'd love to hear about it too.
I can go quickly. So this novel actually has a really huge cast of characters because it does span so many decades and that. So and the author is very good with voices herself because, you know, she used to be an actor on stage and theater, and she's written plays and she's written for TV, and so she's very good with voices. For me, that has been the biggest challenge of this novel, because not only do we have all these very distinctive voices, but we've got, because of caste and class hierarchies, which were very pronounced then, even now, we have very different dialects. There are people have very different, and as most of you here know, dialect is the hardest thing to bring across in English, because it all just ends up getting homogenized. And so I try very hard. I'm trying to find different ways to bring that in. So I've got multiple languages in there because, again, India, multilingual. So we've got different languages, we've got different dialects, and we've got all this class and caste hierarchy. So an educated person, a rich person talking differently. So, I mean, voice is like, it gives me nightmares, to be honest, trying to make sure that I'm getting the voices right and getting them consistent across this 600-page novel. But yeah, right now it is my main project to answer your question, but there isn't any one voice. I'm trying to get all the main characters' voices, and just pray for me that I do get them right. Thank you.
I can just talk about that a little bit. I mean, what I think that I mostly do is stay very close to the original, in especially early on. But I think, I mean, sometimes I think, God, I'm so literal, but that helps me to find the voice that's there, and then then I can smooth it out. But I also have this trick now that works very well with the read aloud feature on Word, where I'm reading it, but and I do silly voices just to um just to hear it in a different way. So when I'm revising, that helps.
What I can say is whatever part I begin with in a novel is always the part that I end up revising the most because of exactly that, finding the voice. It just takes time, spending time with the text over the drafts. And, I recently tried, well, actually, on the book that I have out right now, I used a different method that Jeremy Chang mentioned once, which was to start translating the book in the place that kind of grabbed his attention the most. So I started the book about halfway through. But yeah, always end up revising the part that I began with the most because it just takes time. There's no way I feel like I can get the voice right at the very beginning of my translation.
I think I'm realizing I'm the only one who hasn't answered yet. Sorry. I always have this dream of only working on one translation at a time, but the reality of being full-time freelance translator, I'm almost always juggling a couple of different projects. And I think the happy thing for me, I used to try dividing like between time of day, like morning one language, afternoon another language. Sometimes that works, sometimes deadlines just won't allow it. I do find it easiest, when, sorry, I have all these notifications going off because it's 9 a.m. here, to like, for instance, I did a philosophical book that involved a lot of poetry. Like, if the voices are very different, it's somehow easier for me. I can flip that switch. If they're closer, I feel as though the potential for cross-contamination is more dangerous. And I will also just a shout out to fellow translators who very generously, workshop, who listen or will read things over and help bring me back in, and pose really great questions. That's always really helpful. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you all. Those were all really insightful real answers and gave me a lot of stuff to work with. And with that, I think let's give a final round of applause to our speakers tonight. And then hand things over to YZ to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kalau, for moderating. That was great. So we'll be back next week, the same time, for our 4th session, and all the upcoming information, like who's reading, you can find that on Kat's Instagram or events page. So hit them up. Thank you. See you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody take good care of yourselves.